Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Alan Weinstein, and I want to welcome everyone to the first ChiroSecure live event. It's going to be a really exciting show. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a minute. This is a live Google Hangout for those of you who are familiar with the technology, and because it's a live show, anything can happen because we're live, so hopefully everything will go smoothly. Number one, if you go ahead and you look at the website where you're watching our live event, you're going to see on the right-hand side a place for you to enter your first name, your last name, your email, and your phone number, and the city, state, and zip. And if you'll put your name and email right into that, what's going to happen is we will send you a copy of your informed consent packet. So make sure that you put your name and email and the rest of the information right in there. Number two, there are hundreds and hundreds of people on this live event. So realize that what we've done is right below the video, if you'll scroll down on the ChiroSecure live event website, you're going to see a place for comments. So if you have any comments or any questions, make sure you enter them there. We're not taking any phone calls. Do not email us. Put your comments right in there. And if you'd like, you could put your name and tell us where you're hanging out from. Remember, we have people monitoring those comments with your questions. We're going to do our best to make sure after the event that all of your questions are answered. So make sure that anything you want to know that isn't covered, that you do put it in the comments section. For those of you that are familiar with Google Live Hangouts, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn on what's called the screen share so I could talk a little bit about the event. Okay, here we go. All right, so with that said, this is, as we said before, a live event brought to you by ChiroSecure. ChiroSecure, providing the most comprehensive coverage at the most competitive rate since 1991. I'm going to go ahead and introduce, of course, our guest, the person responsible for literally these live events, and we have literally exciting shows coming up real soon. So Dr. Stu Hoffman is a successful chiropractor for 33 years who owned and operated 14 chiropractic offices and employed many associate DCs throughout the years that he had his clinic. He was awarded Chiropractor of the Year from the Michigan Chiropractic Association, and for the past 23 years, he has served as the owner and operator of ChiroSecure, a malpractice insurance company that has spearheaded to become the second largest program in the marketplace. His expertise and love for chiropractic allow him to be on the cutting edge in protecting DCs as well as supporting the profession through sponsoring chiropractic research programs. And by the way, one of our guests coming up in one of our future shows is a researcher that you'll be able to get some great information. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over and introduce you to our guest, Dr. Stu Hoffman. Dr. Stu?
Thanks, Alan. Good to be here with all of you. We've had such an overwhelming response to this show today, and I really appreciate it. And I know that we have a lot of our insureds, our clients, that we have relationships with already on with us, and that's terrific. But we also have a lot of guests that are not yet with ChiroSecure, so I want to make sure that you're all welcome, and I'm glad that you decided to take your time to spend with me today. And we're going to talk about the informed consent, and I want to start by letting you know that this is a changing topic in our profession, in fact, in all of healthcare. Over the years, 10 years ago, doctors would call me up and say, hey, what do you think about this informed consent? And quite frankly, I would say if I were still in practice, I probably wouldn't even use it. But time changes, and then all of a sudden I get doctors calling me up and they say, well, we're not really into an informed consent, but we were told to use this other form. It's called the Terms of Acceptance. And when I read it, it was a great form. It talked about vertebral subluxation and educating the patient, and I shortly thereafter realized this is more of a promotional piece. It has nothing to do with being a legal document and or protecting the doctor, which is ultimately what my goal is in utilizing informed consent for and with our doctors. Our new packet that Alan was talking about in terms of our informed consent packet, when I'm done, you'll all be getting that, and it will have everything that you need, including the informed consent we now recommend that we've updated, and it's also going to include an instruction sheet, let's call it, as well as a lot of documentation on strokes, which I'm going to get to in this talk in just a few minutes. But I've had help from some of my mentors. People like Dr. Jerry Klum is massively responsible for not just educating me over time, but also telling our company what we can do in order to make our doctors safer, because he's been our #1 expert witness for so many years and has done such a valuable job. So I want to give him as much credit as I possibly could in anything that we do. But when it comes to informed consent, let's take a look at where informed consent actually comes from. It's a doctrine that stems from the concept that patients have the right to control their body and what happens to it. Therefore, to be in control, they have the right to be informed about the proposed care, whatever that is, and the risks associated with it. And we need to understand that this is a patient-driven document. Even the Association of Chiropractic Colleges believes that when patients receive appropriate information, meaning informed consent, before undergoing chiropractic care, it assists the patient and doctor in eliminating misunderstandings. One of the greatest challenges we have at our company is I take every single call from our doctors. Whenever they have an incident and or a claim, I try and take that first call, and then if it needs to go on to claims, attorneys, etc., we do that just like all the other companies. But based on my experience as a chiropractor, as well as being on the insurance side of things for 23 years, I've been able to help listen, assist, and continue coaching our doctors through the situation they found themselves in. And in a lot of cases, we've been able to help prevent things from escalating and actually becoming a claim. So we're very proud of that, but that's what we do. That's the goal here at ChiroSecure, to help assist our doctors keep them, their practices, and quite frankly, their financial future protected. When we get calls from our doctors, it is through an array of challenges that they get, anything from broken ribs to board complaints, refund requests, strokes, all of these things. Today's not the day to go into all of those issues, but I just want you to be aware of that, because when I talk to a doctor that hasn't had their own incident take place in their office, very common, they respond to me, well, that can never happen to me, or I practice different, I do this, I do that, or I don't want to have strokes in my informed consent. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, because I think that we need to emphasize a difference in terms of balancing out philosophy with reality. I urge all of you, never, ever, ever lose the why we do what we do. It's the science, art, and philosophy that makes us as a profession unique. Before you start your day, I always have recommended to set your intention, get centered, and be present with all of your patients and yourself and your staff. When I'm talking to doctors on the telephone and we go through what happened with a specific patient, I always end the conversation by saying, what lesson was there in this for you? Because ultimately, there's always lessons in anything that happens. And if we can take something positive away from these situations that are very scary and disturbing in many, many ways, then we can actually leave on a positive note and actually be a better doctor, be a more successful office, all of those things. And that's what I want for all of you. When we talk about being centered and being focused, believe it or not, we have a lot of chiropractors that answer their own phones. And you know what? That's okay, and that's the way it is. But they're answering the phone, first thing they're saying is, I'm in the middle of treating a patient. Well, so I want to encourage you to think about these things, because it's when you're not focused that negative things seem to show up and happen with your patients. I also get a lot of doctors that argue that there are no inherent risks of receiving chiropractic care. And remember, the informed consent process is all about sharing risk with a patient. They'll say to me, some of the doctors, well, I have a low impact practice. I will never be sued. I only use an instrument to adjust somebody. Or I only treat friends and family. Well, let me just set a couple of these records straight. Number one, we've had claims. Our largest claim in 23 years was adjusting a family member. We've also had stroke claims with instrument adjusting, with upper cervical adjusting. Now, I'm not suggesting that we as chiropractors actually cause those strokes. What I am suggesting is that in the public awareness, there is an association. There is not necessarily a cause and effect relationship, but whether we like it or not, there is a listed association, and all you have to do is go on the internet, just like your patients and their families do all the time. And in reviewing these situations with our doctors, I try to bring their awareness level up. We don't want to cause our doctors to be fearful when they're practicing or even dealing with patient forms. We want you to be more aware so that you can go through your process in your office from a service mentality rather than a defensive mentality, because that's not helpful to you or your patients. So let's think about this for a minute. When we talk about the stroke issue, it happens to be the number one reason I believe that the informed consent is available in terms of helping our doctors. Because when a patient signs off that they understand that stroke is an association, it's a casual and coincidental relationship with spinal manipulation. Let's not get into the wording here. I'm being very specific to not use adjustment. But there is a casual and coincidental relationship between spinal manipulation and some types of strokes, specifically artery dissections. So let's look at the stroke reality in this country. One of the things that Dr. Klum talks about in his talks is breaking down that if you look in this entire country, there's about 750,000 strokes that occur a year. The ones that actually are arising specifically from a dissection of a vertebral artery occur at a rate of 1 per 133,000 of our population. If we do all of the calculations, and I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of going down that road, but it means that 1 in 275 chiropractors may have this situation present themselves with their patients during the course of a year. That's statistically nothing. It's just that you don't want to be one of those 275 doctors. And when we're looking at that, that's how many people experience a dissection that happen to be going currently to a chiropractor. But that doesn't mean, again, that we're causing these strokes. In fact, I can argue, quite frankly, both ways based on what I get to hear and see in terms of the marketplace. When a doctor calls me up and says, Dr. Hoffman, I need help. I have a patient on the adjusting table who just fell over because they were dizzy and they're vomiting. What do I do? Well, you hang up the phone and call 911 and then call me back later, because you need to take responsibility when an adverse situation presents itself. You need to take responsibility, get first aid, instead of waiting and waiting and waiting, because truly the outcomes are so much better the quicker that someone is attended to. But even so, look at these actual claims. Most of the claims, I would say to you, a patient walked into the office already in a stroke episode, but the doctor failed to recognize it. And the adjustment may have brought it full-blown. It's very hard at that point in time to separate yourself from that outcome. A different type of example was I had a doctor not long ago who had a 67-year-old female patient, and for the past 2 weeks before she had come in, she had mild neck discomfort, nothing that's a massive red flag to any of us, and it mainly bothered her when she was driving and turning her head. This is a typical situation in any of our offices. But upon examination, the doctor found reduced range of motion. This particular doctor used some heat, mild stretching, and he adjusted C2. The patient then said to him, it felt a little stuck. So what did the doctor do? He went in and adjusted a second time. And that's half of the point of telling you this story. Our experience shows that it's not the adjustment that usually causes the trauma to the doctor and patient with a negative outcome. It's when the doctor goes back the second, third, and even the fourth time and is trying to adjust based on the symptom that the patient is experiencing. Sometimes it's better to leave it alone if you find that it's clear, and if the patient's symptoms are developing into stroke-like symptoms, it's time for first aid. But this doctor did adjust it again, but at that point the patient felt immediate relief, except that the patient said, oh, let me check, I'm going to turn my head. When the patient turned to the left, they started feeling lightheaded and dizzy, and then they started feeling some numbness in their hand, and vision was starting to get impaired. So the doctor checked the blood pressure. It was slightly high, and then the patient started to lean to the left, and then she vomited. And the doctor then did exactly the right thing. He called 911. They took the patient to the hospital, and upon entrance, they found that there was a thrombosis that they described as the size of a golf ball. So I asked the doctor, tell me, what kind of medications was this patient on? And they were on 2 different medications. One was for high blood pressure and nothing out of the ordinary, and the other was Evista. And that was one that I just looked up. The first thing that you see in a big red box, it is precautions. Increased risk of deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism has been reported, and increased risk of death due to stroke occurred in trial of postmenopausal women, which this is one of. Well, we can associate that with this patient's stroke. However, the patient didn't sue the doctor that put her on the medication, or that same doctor that was supposed to be monitoring the patient, or the pharmaceutical company that created something that causes these outcomes. No one looks in that direction, but they do look at the chiropractor. We practice in a world that there are many, many double standards. This is simply another one. So it is imperative that stroke be in the informed consent. But we have, I believe, put it in there as chiropractic friendly as possible. So I want you to just keep that in mind when you get your packet, to look at it. And please don't send me yours and say, well, can you read mine and tell me if it's okay? No, it's not. We're recommending that you implement ours, and all the information will be there. And listen, when we get any kind of a legal malpractice claim, you're going to always see in that claim 3 main items. They're going to have a million things listed, but there are 3 main ones. One is that there was negligence on the part of the doctor. Well, that needs to be proven. The other is that you went outside of the standard of care. Again, sometimes that is something that can easily be shown and accepted, and sometimes we can argue there is no standard of care that's universally accepted. But the last of the 3 is that there was no informed consent, and it shows up in every claim that you can imagine. One of our stroke claims, the attorney indicated that the only thing we had going for us, because it's a bad claim, is that the patient did sign an informed consent. So we need to look at some of these things when we're looking at our procedures and how to keep us as the doctors protected and safe. So let's just spend the last few minutes talking about how do we implement our informed consent. Well, first and foremost, as I said before, it's all about us and being okay with it, because patients generally never ask questions. You're going to get 1 out of 100. I gave a much lengthier presentation this past weekend on strokes and informed consent and a number of other items. And I asked for a raise of hands. How many already utilize informed consent that actually indicate stroke in it as well? And so many people answered yes, yes, yes. Great. Out of that, how many have had a question in the last month, in the last 3 months, in the last 6 months? There were some responses, but they were so few and far between, and I'm going to tell you how I would recommend responding to that. When you have your consultation with the patient is when to bring up the informed consent, because informed consent, and depending on what state you're in, as an example, in California, you utilize an informed consent process. You have to discuss the informed consent and have the patient sign it. To do that realistically in a chiropractic setting, which is very different than traditional medical settings, I always recommend have the informed consent at your front desk with all the new patient paperwork. They're going to sign it. If one person has a question about it, I recommend that your staff indicate to them, don't sign it, leave it until you meet with the doctor. They'll review it with you and answer any questions. At that point, when you do your consultation, you're going to first, of course, create some sort of rapport with that new patient, and then you're going to explain to them that one of the forms that you signed at our front desk, just like you sign in every other doctor's office, because they do, is what we call an informed consent. The great thing about our informed consent is any of the risks we even indicated on there have at most a casual coincidental relationship compared to some of the drugs you see on TV or the procedures you get and or hear about in most medical offices. So I want to know, did you read the informed consent? Yes. Did you have any questions? No. Great. What I'd like you to do, doctors, is then document that. Went through informed consent, patient had no questions, initial in your documentation. If you use software, make a template, informed consent with no questions. For those that have a question, we know it's going to be, well, I heard about someone that had a stroke and went to a chiropractor. Tell me more about that. I love people asking that question because one of the things I learned a long time ago when I was in active practice is I'd rather any negatives come up at the very beginning because it takes away the person leaving the minute they feel better and you not knowing why. And then they don't return your calls. You go to the supermarket, you see them down the aisle, and then they cut down the next aisle just so that they don't have to face you because they needed the help in their mind, but they were afraid of the continuation based on what they've heard outside of your office. So when they ask questions, it's terrific. And we're going to arm you with information in this packet on how safe chiropractic is compared to any medical procedure, including taking aspirin. I want you to be empowered so that you can be an educator in your practice and not be afraid of these things coming up and being discussed in your office. I want you to be the leader and educator in your office and your community to set the record straight, because if you don't, nobody else will. We have too much media that it has a vested interest in telling a story that just ain't so. So when we talk about the whole stroke issue, remember, there are articles that are still coming out associating chiropractic and stroke just through a little group called the American Heart Association, sending out to their members as well as to all the media all about chiropractic and stroke. This isn't a philosophical debate. We're talking about protecting you. Where 10, 15, 20 years ago, if we had one stroke claim in a year to 2 years, it was a big thing. Now, if I get that every other week, 1 to 2, it would be better than what we currently get to see. So please keep in mind that when we're talking about strokes and we're talking about informed consent and any other issue with it, we want to make sure ultimately that it's you that we're protecting, and when you're utilizing these forms, it's one additional layer of protection that you get to have for yourself. Because even if you have insurance, all insurance is layers of protection. There's never an absolute in life. The more layers, the more protected you are. And that's why we coach our doctors on how to protect themselves when they have associate doctors or multiple clinics, multiple corporations, things of that nature, because there are different ways to make sure you are ultimately protected. And that's our job, to work with you to make sure we do the best job we can in educating and empowering you as the chiropractor to go on and put this in the background of your office so that it gets done and you're protected and you go on and serve more people rather than be fearful.
Dr. Stu, can I jump in here for a second to ask you a question?
Please.
Yeah, now that, the last series of articles that the American Heart Association came out with, the American Stroke Association, it was publicized on WebMD. The brunt of those articles really talked about informed consent, and they really emphasized the fact that the patient needs to know the risk of chiropractic manipulation and stroke. Does that dictate to the practitioner that's listening to our live event that they really have no other choice but to follow what you've been saying on this call and to follow what they're going to get in the packet that we're giving them? In other words, it's no longer, well, I'm not sure if I want to bring up stroke or not. Now that that's in the public domain, there's really no other choice. Am I correct?
I believe you're correct. When at the beginning of this talk, I said 10 years ago I would never use it, then went into more of a terms of acceptance. But today's environment mandates that this happens. Quite frankly, California requires it, some other states require it, like Connecticut. I voiced from the chiropractic point of view that I wasn't for Connecticut mandating that stroke be in an informed consent. I'm not for mandating anything when medical doctors and dentists and other practitioners don't get mandated. We shouldn't be taking that on for ourselves. But at the same time, it's a responsible thing to do. And it is not really an option any longer. It's something that you need to take and take seriously for yourself, your practice, and your patients as well.
Okay, one more question. I was one of those, I practiced 30-something years myself, and I was one of those doctors that had to call 911 3 times in my practice. Fortunately, it wasn't even the patients that I was calling about. It was people that had come into the office that might have been a family member who was just sitting in the waiting room waiting for me to treat the family member. And so 3 times I had to call 911. And the first thing when the 911, the EMTs came to the office, the first question they asked every single time was, did you adjust the patient? And the reason I'm asking that is obviously the answer to that question in my case was no, they're not even a patient. They were just sitting in my waiting room. But what about the information that a doctor should give in a circumstance where if it was a patient they were treating and they called 911, how much information do they actually give to the people arriving? Obviously, it's important for them to know what was going on, exam findings and things like that. Do you have any recommendations along those lines?
Yeah. But I think more important, Alan, is the understanding of something that you just brought up. And that is, in emergency rooms, the doctors are now trained that when somebody comes in with any stroke-like symptoms, the first question is, have you been to a chiropractor? And when the answer is yes, that helps formulate their diagnosis, their entrance diagnosis into the ER. On the national boards for medical doctors, there's questions about chiropractors causing strokes, which artery gets dissected, etc., etc. These are very real things that we are up against. I just had a stroke issue where the doctor called up exactly what you said. They did call 911 because it's something that happened in the office, and the ER person, the medical doctor that was the entrance doctor, and there were more than one of them, had already put down chiropractic stroke. They hadn't even done any imaging tests, which, by the way, were all negative. But the entrance diagnosis was stroke caused by chiropractor. So this is why, whether we like it or not, or whether we like the wording or not, it's not a philosophical debate on these forms. This is a form that adds another layer of protection for our doctors. Period. That's the most important point.
Really fantastic. Well, we're just about running out of time, so I just want to remind everybody that while you're on the ChiroSecure Live event page, make sure you put your name, your first name, last name, the rest of your contact information on the form on the right side of that page. You will be sent the link to download your informed consent packet, which has all of the information that Dr. Stu was talking about, as well as an informed consent form that you could take a look at, as well as the documentation, which is really fantastic. That's number one. Number two, as we said before, if you'll scroll down the page, you're going to see the comment section, and in that comment section, if you have any questions that you would like answered or further explanation, make sure you put it in there. You don't be calling the office or sending emails. We will make sure that we gather those questions, and we're even considering, because this had such a large response from the profession, to do a second Q&A. I also wanted to mention that we're going to try and get not try, but we actually are getting on the show Dr. Klum, that Dr. Stu referenced as one of his mentors and helped put that together. He'll be coming on the show. We have a guest every other week, and we will notify you who that guest is, what they'll be talking about, as well as we're always going to try to give you something for attending that will be sort of our ethical bribe so that you come here and get the information. One of the things that, of course, I want to thank Dr. Stu and ChiroSecure. This is really cutting-edge material. No other insurance company in the malpractice world is doing what ChiroSecure and Dr. Stu is. And I remember years ago, the only thing I ever saw that any company ever did was they would always write a case of somebody that was involved in a malpractice. But this is really more proactive. We're going to be bringing you shows on what you need to know before you get into that situation and protect yourself. You don't want to miss any of those. They're really exciting. Again, these are live events. You will be notified of those. Dr. Stu, anything else you want to add at this point before we close down the show?
No, I want to thank everyone for participating. And one of your points about some of our future guests that we've invited onto these shows, it's not even just to help prevent, but we're going to even have attorneys on that talk about what happens if, and so that it takes the fear factor away and you'll know what to expect. And by understanding some of these things and some of the research, because we have some researchers that we sponsor coming on, you're going to be able to, I believe, build a bigger, better, stronger practice for yourself. And ultimately, that's what we all want, and we want to do it together. We're a team, and that's how we work with you.
Absolutely terrific. One last thing I want to point out before we close out the show, and that is, if you're not already a ChiroSecure client, on the right-hand side of the page, you're going to see something called Quick Quotes. Make sure you click on that and make sure that you fill out one of our Quick Quotes. We're also going to have a transcript of this show for all the people that gave us their name and contact information that you will get a link to in addition to the Your Informed Consent packet. On behalf of myself, Dr. Alan Weinstein, Dr. Stu Hoffman, and of course, ChiroSecure, we thank you for coming to our live event, and we'll notify you. Our next live event is actually in 2 weeks. We have an exciting show. We'll give you all those details. So again, on behalf of myself, ChiroSecure, and Dr. Stu, we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day, everybody.